Okay, now let's go into assistive devices. This is an interesting set of topics, and I hope you'll enjoy this discussion. We'll go over some materials here that you'll hear not discussed in other programs or in other writings, and so I'm hopeful that this will be very helpful for you. Assistive devices are described in the AMA Guides Table 17.5. And this is on page 529 if you want to follow along. And this table 17.5 discusses assistive devices that are required in certain lower extremity impairments. And if you're looking at your book, you'll notice that with the exception of 2 instances, all impairments describe dependence. And I emphasize that word dependence on an assistive device for mobility. And for instances of permanent impairment due to gait disturbance, there must be objective findings of pathology, such as those found on imaging studies. And in relation to the lower extremities, imaging studies would include signs of at least moderate and possibly even advanced degenerative changes. Now, those aren't the only possible objective findings of pathology, but those are the ones that are described in Table 17.5. I believe other findings of pathology would qualify, such as post-surgical implantation of metal hardware with resulting scars and loss of joint range of motion. In my opinion, that would also qualify as an objective finding, but that's not found in the descriptions in Table 17.5. Further, the use of an assistive device alone does not necessarily in and of itself qualify for permanent impairment, especially when the assistive device is based largely on subjective factors such as claimed pain or a feeling that the leg or the lower extremity is going to give way. That would be the use of an assistive device based only on subjective factors. There must be positive objective findings to support the need and use for an assistive device. In my opinion, and this is not written anywhere in the guides, in order to qualify for consideration for permanent impairment due to gait disturbance under Section 17.2c of the guides, any assistive device must have a written prescription or must be provided by the primary treating physician or other consulting specialists. Also, the assistive device, in my opinion, must be properly fit for the patient's condition and body habitus, and the patient must be properly instructed on the care and use of the assistive device. And we'll discuss each one of those findings, each one of those requirements, each one of those criteria in just a minute. So, in order to qualify as a medically necessary device, it must be prescribed by the primary treater, must be properly fit for the patient's condition and body type, and the patient must be instructed on its proper use. Okay, and we'll go into those particularly as relates to canes in just a minute. Section 17.2c describes the following different types of assistive devices. Goes into canes, discusses crutches, discusses short leg braces, also known as the AFOs, discusses long leg braces, known as the KAFOs, discusses wheelchair, and in my opinion, even though they're not specifically discussed in the AMA guides, walkers could qualify for permanent impairment if it can be shown that the injured worker is dependent upon a walker for mobility. Now, with the exception of wheelchairs, we'll discuss each one of these assistive devices below, and even though they're not discussed in the AMA guides, we'll also go into brief discussion about walkers. Okay, so let's talk first here about canes. Canes have a specific function. Canes are intended to assist with balance, mostly, primarily, and secondarily to relieve weight bearing from painful joints. Canes are not intended for full weight bearing. Now, even though you've seen hundreds of canes probably in your life, you probably may not have given much thought to them. I know I never did. But there's four basic parts to a cane. There's the handle of the cane. There's two basic types of handles. We'll go over those in just a moment. There's a collar, and the collar is what connects the handle to the shaft of the cane. Then there's the shaft of the cane. That's the straight part of the cane. And the shaft is generally made of either wood or aluminum or other strong or lightweight material. The tip is also known as the ferrule, and the tip is generally made of rubber and comes in various sizes and shapes. Most of them are usually round. The ones that you're probably most familiar with are just small round coverings that go over the end of the shaft. I recently saw an interesting ferrule, interesting tip, and this is just an example of how what you focus on expands. And as I was preparing this article, I all of a sudden became more aware of canes out in the general public. And I was leaving the gym one day, and there was a guy exiting the gym at the same time I was, and so we went out the door almost simultaneously. And as we got outside on the sidewalk, I noticed his cane, and I said, "Well, look at that cane." And he said, "Yes, indeed, yeah, look at my cane." And I said, "Well, what kind of a rubber tip you got there?" And the rubber tip was notable because it was large. It had a large base. I would say the diameter, or the radius of the base was probably 3 inches. And he said, well, you know, a friend of his just gave him this rubber tip, and it was brand new. And he said, look at what my rubber tip can do. And as he said that, he let go of his cane, and because of this large base rubber tip, the cane stood up by itself. It was stabilized by this large rubber tip. And then he pulled a trick on me and caught me a little bit off guard. As he went to reach for the cane, he apparently inadvertently knocked the cane over. And because I was not expecting this, I reflexively went to retrieve his cane for him so he would not have to bend down and get his cane. And he quickly stopped me, and he said, ah. And so I stood back from the cane, and he demonstrated to me another feature of this large rubber rounded base of his cane. He simply reached his foot over and stepped on this piece of rubber and tilted the cane right back up into his hand. So there's multiple benefits of that rubber tip or ferrule of that cane. And so there's many different types. As far as the handle goes, there's many different types of handles, and there's different custom configurations that you can get. And most commonly, the two basic types of cane handles that you'll see are number one, a rounded handle cane, and these are the most, or I should say the least expensive. Therefore, they're the most common that you'll find. And the second type of cane handle is called a T-handle cane. And you'll see these out in the general public as well. And they come with various different configurations and customizations. And there's many different styles of the T-handle cane. Now, because of its shape and its accommodation to the hand, The T-handle cane is much more comfortable to use than is the rounded handle cane. The rounded handle cane focuses most of the weight onto the pisiform bone of the support hand. And you'll recall that the pisiform bone is a sesamoid bone, just like the patella is a sesamoid bone. It's a sesamoid bone. It's embedded in the tendon of the flexor carpi ulnaris muscle. And because the weight then comes down onto the sesamoid bone, this is not acceptable over time. This is going to be painful to use over time. So when I see a person that has a rounded handle cane, I conclude that because of this drawback, the fact that the weight comes down onto the pisiform bone, this indicates to me that this cane is in limited use because it's simply not comfortable to use over a long period of time. On the other hand, a T-handle cane is more suggestive of full-time use because it is more comfortable, because it does fit the hand better, and because it distributes more of the weight-bearing load over a greater surface area of the hand. Also because T-handle canes are more expensive, and because they can be purchased in personalized and customized design, in my opinion, the presence of a T-handle cane indicates a more committed, more long-term cane user. And so these are a couple of things that I look at when I evaluate the use of canes with injured workers. Now,